The alien academy stood high above the misty valley, its towers glowing with strange blue lights, and inside its largest hall rows of students from many worlds gathered in silence. They came from species known for memory, for discipline, for logic, and for obedience to structure, and they all carried data tablets filled with endless notes, every word of every lecture carefully recorded, copied, and studied without error. For in this academy knowledge was power, and notes were the proof of learning. At the front of the hall stood the alien professor, tall and thin, his skin pale silver like metal, his eyes sharp as knives, his voice cold as ice. He demanded obedience, he demanded discipline, and he demanded notes. He moved slowly across the rows, checking each student's work, his long fingers sliding over tablets, his head nodding when he found neat rows of alien symbols. Every student bowed their head in fear and respect as he passed, for failure was not allowed here. But near the back of the hall sat one human, a single figure among hundreds of alien shapes, his posture relaxed, his eyes calm, and his desk empty. No tablet, no notes, nothing. The other students whispered to each other, pointing with twitching fingers, their voices filled with mockery and disbelief, for they already expected what would happen when the professor reached him. Humans were seen as reckless and primitive, and many believed they had no place in the great academy. The professor's steps echoed like thunder as he approached. Silence spread wider and deeper, and all eyes turned toward the human. The professor's shadow fell over the desk, his voice low but sharp. He asked the question every student dreaded. He demanded to see the notes, the records, the proof of discipline, but the desk remained empty. The human only looked up with steady eyes, a small calm smile on his face, and he spoke with words that froze the room. He said he had no notes. He said he did not need them. The air grew heavy. The aliens hissed and muttered. Some laughed. Some sneered. The professor's eyes narrowed like blades. His voice rose. He called the human foolish and arrogant. He said the academy was not a place for carelessness. But the human remained calm. He explained that he could remember everything without writing, that his mind worked differently, that he did not copy words. He understood them, and that was enough. The professor's laughter echoed coldly through the hall, and he turned to the class. He declared that humans were reckless. They believed too much in instinct, too much in chance, too much in defiance. He said this student would now be taught a lesson in humility. The other aliens leaned forward with eager eyes, waiting for the human to be crushed, for in this academy failure was always public, and humiliation was a weapon sharper than any blade. The professor asked again where the notes were, his voice now echoing across the metal walls. But the humans simply repeated his claim, that he needed no notes, that his mind was enough, his tone calm, his face unshaken. The room erupted with laughter and scorn. The students of other species shook their heads, their eyes gleaming with contempt, for no one could defy the tradition of notes. No one could claim memory strong enough to match written proof. The professor stepped closer, his towering figure casting the human in shadow. His long hand slammed the desk, the sound like a strike of thunder, and he declared that if the human spoke truth, then he would prove it before all. There would be no mercy, no delay, no second chance. The challenge would be immediate, the test harsh and absolute. The entire class leaned closer, their hearts pounding, for they were about to witness a downfall or a miracle. The human leaned back in his seat, his eyes steady, his breath slow, his hands resting quietly as if no fear lived within him, and he gave a single nod, accepting the challenge. The aliens around him whispered in disbelief. They thought him mad. They thought him doomed, but his calmness unsettled even the professor, who now raised his voice for all to hear. He declared the test. He said that the human must now recite his last 3 lectures word for word, with no mistake, no pause, no error. The hall fell into silence so deep that every breath, every movement, every heartbeat seemed loud. The professor crossed his arms, his eyes fixed like iron on the human. The alien student smirked and leaned closer, waiting to enjoy his failure. But the human only closed his eyes for a moment, as if reaching into memory far deeper than any alien could understand. And then he opened them, his calm gaze sweeping across the hall, and his mouth began to form the first words. The great hall was silent yet heavy with tension. The alien professor's voice had cut through the air like steel, His challenge hung above the class, like a blade ready to strike. Every alien student leaned forward with eyes bright and cold, waiting for the human to stumble, waiting for the moment of collapse, for they believed no one could meet the impossible demand. They believed this strange species of flesh and bone was destined to fail before them, and they craved that failure like hungry predators. The human sat still, his chair creaking softly as he straightened his back, his calm expression an insult to the very structure of the academy, his eyes neither fearful nor arrogant, but steady like deep rivers. The professor's thin silver hands folded behind his back as he commanded the recitation. He expected hesitation. He expected fear. But instead he heard words begin to flow. Soft at first, yet growing with strength. Words that matched his own voice, his own lectures, his own rhythm, as if time itself had reversed and his lessons were being spoken again. At first the aliens smirked, their jaws twisting in disbelief. They thought it a trick, a poor copy. But as the minutes stretched, their eyes widened, for the words came with flawless precision, every phrase exact, every pause perfect. The human spoke as if his mind had become a mirror that held all knowledge, his voice calm and clear, no stutter, no falter, no break. He recited 3 full lectures, without looking down, without breathless panic, without a single written line before him, and the silence in the hall thickened with awe. The professor's sharp gaze narrowed, his silver eyes glittering with suspicion. He asked himself if this could be memory alone, or something far more dangerous, for memory without understanding was common among certain species, parrots of knowledge. But what he saw in the human's gaze was not blind recall. It was thought. It was living comprehension, and that made him uneasy. The students shifted nervously now, their whispers breaking into the silence like cracks in ancient stone. Some muttered that no human should be able to do this. Others muttered that perhaps the stories about their strange adaptability were true. When the human's voice finally rested, a ripple moved across the crowd. Alien claws tapped nervously on metal desks, tendrils curled and uncurled with unease. Wings twitched and folded, the entire room alive with the tremor of disbelief. The professor did not move for a long time, his face a mask, his posture rigid, until he finally leaned forward, his voice low and cold, and he said that memory alone was worthless if it lacked depth. He declared that anyone could mimic, anyone could repeat. But true mastery was to know what was never spoken, to see what was hidden in silence. The human tilted his head slightly, his calm smile unbroken, his voice steady as he answered that he did not only hear words, he saw meaning woven between them. He felt connections that others ignored. He built shapes in his mind where others saw walls. He explained that notes were chains to many, chains that bound them to letters instead of thought. But his mind was free to build and connect, to imagine and recall as one. And as he spoke, the professor's cold mask tightened, for no student had ever spoken in such defiance within this hall. The aliens sneered once more, though their sneers now hid unease. One with scaled skin whispered that humans were reckless gamblers. Another with insect eyes clicked that humans would drown in their own arrogance. Yet others remained silent, their thoughts caught in storm, their eyes locked on the human who dared to rise against the professor's tradition. The air in the hall seemed to thicken, the lights flickered faintly, and even the walls seemed to echo the weight of defiance. The professor finally raised his hand, his silver palm gleaming under the pale lights, his voice sharp like lightning. He declared that if the human truly claimed more than memory, if he claimed comprehension beyond surface, then he would face the hidden test, a test no one had passed without failing, a test that revealed arrogance and broke pride. His words rang like thunder as he demanded the human explain what was never said but was always implied, the meaning behind the meaning, the truth behind the lecture's bones, a task that had broken the will of students across centuries. The students gasped and hissed. Some whispered that the human was finished now, for implication was more dangerous than memory. It was the shadow that most minds could not grasp. It was the silence between the lines where truth lived. Many species relied on notes and logic to untangle such webs. They wrote long analyses, filled hundreds of pages, and still failed. But this human had nothing. No tablet, no ink, only his voice and his strange human mind. The human leaned forward now, his hands resting lightly on the edge of his empty desk, his voice steady as he began to explain. He did not repeat words this time. He told them of the pattern that tied the lectures together, of how the professor's chosen examples revealed not only structure but hidden preference, of how each pause and shift in tone revealed unspoken warnings. He connected the dots between the lessons, like stars forming constellations, painting a picture of meaning that no alien had dared to see. His voice carried with quiet power, and every student leaned closer against their own will. The professor's face froze, his silver skin shimmering faintly as if a crack had formed in his armor of pride. He asked the human how he could see such things. The human answered that it was because humans survived not by strength nor speed, but by seeing patterns, by reading danger, by imagining what was not yet real. He said that humans were built to look at shadows and see shapes, to take fragments and build pictures, to take silence and hear voices. And as his words echoed across the hall, the atmosphere shifted like a storm breaking. The aliens who had laughed now sat stiff in their seats, their claws and tendrils no longer mocking but tight with unease. The insect-eyed student blinked rapidly. The scaled one lowered his gaze. Even those known for logic found themselves unsettled, for they realized that the human had not only remembered, he had seen deeper than any of them. He had turned the professor's hidden thoughts into clear truth before the entire class, and in that moment the professor felt his control slipping like sand through fingers. But the professor did not yield. He straightened his tall frame, his eyes sharp with cold fire. He declared that the human had walked into dangerous ground, and if he was bold enough to claim such power, then he would face something no student had faced before. He would endure what the professor called the impossible lecture. The lecture delivered at speed and weight that shattered even the strongest minds. The students gasped again, their voices trembling in fear and anticipation, for many had seen this trial break even the most disciplined. The human only nodded, his calm smile returning, his eyes steady as rivers, his voice quiet yet unshaken as he said that he would face whatever test the professor set, that he was not afraid of words nor of meaning. His simple answer cut through the tension like a blade, leaving the hall silent once more, and every alien heart beat faster, for they knew something unthinkable was about to unfold, something that would either destroy the human or change the academy forever. The hall was heavy with silence as the professor's voice declared the impossible task, his silver hands raised, his words sharp like blades cutting through the air. He commanded the human to endure what no alien student had ever survived, the impossible lecture, a flood of knowledge too vast, too fast, too merciless for any single mind. The students leaned forward with eyes wide and breath held, some eager to see the human fall, some trembling at the thought of what was about to come, the alien. Professor's gaze glowed with cold fire as he activated the towering screens that lined the walls. Symbols appeared in a blur, lines of equations, shifting diagrams, ancient words from civilizations long vanished, entire theories flashing like lightning, too fast to follow, each one flowing into the next, no pause, no mercy, no pattern that an ordinary mind could capture. The noise of the data filled the hall like thunder. The light of the screens burned against the eyes. Even the aliens who were not being tested looked away, their minds already aching with confusion, their claws scratching against metal desks, the tendrils curling in pain. But the human did not look away. He leaned back slightly, his eyes steady and open, his breathing slow, his face calm. The lecture poured like a storm, relentless and unending. It twisted with complexity beyond measure. The professor's lips curled into a smile. He believed this was the moment of failure, the moment the human's arrogance would be broken. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, the human remained still, his gaze unbroken, as though his mind was not drowning in chaos, but flowing with it, as though the torrent was not overwhelming him, but filling him. The students began to whisper in fear and disbelief. They had seen their brightest peers collapse within seconds, clutching their heads, begging for mercy. Yet this human sat unmoved, as if he was listening to music rather than madness. The professor increased the speed, his voice a whip, the data flashing now twice as fast, ancient logic twisting into alien equations melting into quantum structures, structures folding into paradoxes, paradoxes dissolving into codes that no one had ever spoken aloud in centuries. The weight of it pressed down on the hall, like a storm crushing stone. The lights flickered. The air trembled. Even the walls groaned as if burdened by the knowledge spilling into them. But still the human's gaze did not break. His lips parted slightly as if he were whispering to himself, his fingers tapping softly against the desk, in rhythm with something no one else could hear. Whispers turned to gasps. The students stared in disbelief. The insect-eyed alien clutched its mandibles tight. The scaled one's tail thrashed in agitation. The feathered one pressed its wings tight to its chest. They could not understand what they were seeing. They could not believe that a fragile human mind could stand in the storm of knowledge that shattered even their strongest. Some muttered that he was insane, that he was breaking and simply not showing it. Others muttered that perhaps madness was the secret weapon of his kind, that perhaps chaos and defiance were not weaknesses, but something far worse, something alien in its own right. At last the flood ended. The screens went dark. The professor's voice fell silent. The echoes of the torrent faded into stillness. The hall felt hollow in the wake of the storm, as though time itself had paused. The students sat stunned, their eyes wide and unblinking. The professor straightened, waiting for the human to collapse, waiting for him to clutch his head, to scream, to fall. Yet none of that happened. The human simply inhaled deeply, exhaled calmly, and rose slowly to his feet, his hands steady, his eyes alive with a strange calm fire. He looked at the board at the front of the hall, and with a quiet voice he asked if he may write. The professor gave no answer at first, his jaw clenched, his pride warring with suspicion, until finally he gestured sharply. The human walked to the board, his steps unhurried, his shoulders straight. He took the stylus in his hand, and he began to write, line after line, symbol after symbol, diagram after diagram. The board filled with the torrent that had been unleashed, each detail placed perfectly. No hesitation, no pause. The alien students leaned closer and closer, their disbelief growing heavier with every mark, for the human was not simply copying what had been shown. He was arranging it, shaping it, building structure where chaos had reigned. Gasps filled the air. Tendrils twitched uncontrollably. Claws clicked nervously against desks. Wings fluttered in shock. They realized he was not simply remembering. He was understanding. He was building. He was seeing patterns in the storm and weaving them together into meaning. When he reached the edge of the board, he did not stop. He turned and continued across the next, his voice speaking softly as he explained connections between fragments that had never been linked before, his words steady and sure, his gaze alive with clarity. The alien students who once sneered now sat in silent awe, unable to look away from what was unfolding. The professor's cold mask cracked for the first time. His eyes narrowed not with scorn, but with unease. His hands twitched behind his back, for he saw something he could not deny, something that unsettled him more than failure ever could. The human was not merely surviving the impossible lecture. He was mastering it. He was reshaping it. He was expanding upon it, finding patterns the professor himself had overlooked, creating bridges across concepts thought unrelated. The silver-skinned scholar, who had never once been challenged, now felt the sharp sting of doubt, and the silence in the hall pressed heavier and heavier as he realized the truth. The human paused at last, the board filled with new order. His hand lowered slowly. He turned back to face the professor and the class, his voice calm as he explained that the torrent of knowledge was not chaos to him, that it had rhythm like waves, like storms, like beating hearts, that he listened and felt, that he shaped it within his mind as one shapes fire into light. He said that humans were born not into peace, but into danger, that they survived by finding meaning in storms, by hearing patterns in noise, by making sense of madness. And as his words echoed, the hall felt smaller, darker, trembling with realization. The alien students sat frozen, their thoughts torn between fear and awe. Some whispered that no one should hold such power. Others whispered that perhaps humanity's danger was greater than they had believed. And the professor stood still, his voice caught in his throat, his pride torn, his authority shaking. Yet his cold nature did not break entirely. He stepped forward slowly, his silver eyes gleaming with a strange mix of fury and fascination. He declared that this was not the end, that if the human claimed such mastery, then the galaxy itself would demand proof, that the test was not over, that what had been shown here was only the beginning. The human simply met his gaze, his calm smile returning, his voice quiet yet unshaken as he said that he was ready for whatever test would come next. The professor's words echoed back, declaring that the galaxy would now watch, that every world, every scholar, every ruler would hear of this defiance. The students shifted in unease, for they knew the meaning of those words. They knew that this moment had escaped the walls of the academy, that it would ripple outward into something greater, something vast and dangerous. The silence in the hall grew unbearable, until the professor's final words cut through like thunder. He said that memory may astound, that comprehension may unsettle, but survival of the galaxy's judgment was the true trial. And the hall shivered with those words, every alien heart trembling with dread and wonder. And as the humans stood calm and unbroken at the center, the question that haunted them all was whispered through the shadows of the hall. Was this memory? Was this mastery? Or was this madness? The hall had not yet recovered from the storm of the impossible lecture. The alien students still trembled in silence, their eyes wide and filled with disbelief, their minds torn between awe and fear. And at the center of it all the human stood calm and steady, his presence a defiance that unsettled the very foundation of the academy. The professor's tall figure loomed like a silver blade, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of fury and fascination, his pride wounded but his will unbroken. And he spoke again with a voice that echoed like thunder across the chamber, declaring that memory was not enough and comprehension was not enough. That true mastery was hidden not in the words, but in the meaning behind them, in the silence between them, in the unspoken truths that shaped them. The students shivered, for they knew this test was different, far more dangerous, for notes and memory could capture words, but not shadows, and shadows were where most minds faltered. Many had attempted to explain what was implied in lectures, to untangle the silent webs woven between examples and metaphors, and many had failed, collapsing under the weight of their own misinterpretations, their pride shattered, their status lost. Yet now this human was being commanded to do what no one had done, to speak of what had never been said but always lived beneath the surface. And the silence in the hall deepened as every gaze locked upon him. The professor's voice cut like a blade through the air as he demanded the human reveal the meaning behind his lectures, demanded that he show not only knowledge but vision, demanded that he expose the hidden current that no alien student had ever traced. The students leaned forward, claws clutching desks, tendrils curling with tension, wings folding tight as they awaited the spectacle of collapse, for they believed no human mind could stretch so far, no human tongue could carry truths that had never been spoken, and many whispered that this would finally be the moment when arrogance broke into dust. But the human did not flinch, he did not stutter. He did not lower his gaze. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the empty desk before him, his voice calm, yet strong as he began to speak. He spoke not of the words themselves, but of the spaces between them. He told the class that the professor's lectures were not random, that each example chosen revealed not only structure but preference, not only logic but warning. He explained that the rhythm of the professor's pauses betrayed his caution, that his emphasis revealed hidden fear, that the stories he chose to illustrate ideas reflected more than theory. They reflected experience. They reflected battles unseen, truths the professor never dared to confess aloud. Gasps filled the hall as the human continued, his words weaving connections the others had never noticed. He said that the professor spoke of equations, but feared their consequences, that he taught structures, but trembled at the chaos they could unleash, that he cloaked warnings in metaphors, but could not disguise the weight of them. And as the human spoke, it was as if he reached into the professor's very mind and pulled out the ghosts hidden there. The alien students shifted uneasily there, eyes wide with shock, for the human was not only analyzing lectures, he was exposing the professor himself before the entire academy. The professor's silver face froze, his hands clenched tightly behind his back, his cold mask trembling with the first hint of a crack. He demanded with sharp words how the human could claim such things. What gave him the right to speak of fears and warnings? The human answered calmly that humans survived not through strength nor speed nor claws, but through patterns, that they had always seen more than what was spoken, that survival demanded it, that danger was rarely announced and death was rarely written down, that humanity had lived by reading shadows, by hearing silence, by building pictures from fragments. and that was why he saw what others ignored. The hall quivered with murmurs, alien voices clashing in whispers of awe and dread. Some hissed that the human was arrogant beyond measure. Others whispered that perhaps this strange species truly was different. Perhaps their weakness was their strength. The insect-eyed student clicked nervously. The scaled one's tail lashed against the floor. The feathered one rustled its wings, all of them torn between disbelief and dawning fear, for they realized the human's mind did not follow their rules. His way of seeing was not theirs, and that made him dangerous in ways they could not defend against. The professor stood still, his pride battling against truth, his eyes burning with cold fire. He declared that if the human claimed such vision, then he must face what no student had ever endured. He must take the fragments of implication, the ghosts of silence, and build them into something greater, something new, something the academy itself could not deny. And his words rang like thunder across the walls. Every alien student stiffened, their breaths caught, their hearts racing, for this was beyond any test they had imagined, beyond any trial they had seen. This was a demand not to remember nor to explain, but to create. The human gave a small nod, his calm smile unbroken, his eyes steady as rivers. He rose from his seat and walked to the front of the hall, his steps echoing softly in the heavy silence. He faced the professor with unflinching gaze. He took the stylus once more in his hand, and he began to draw, not copying symbols this time, but weaving new ones, merging diagrams with shapes of his own, linking equations with metaphors, building a structure on the board that none had seen before. The alien students gasped as the lines came together like constellations, each mark flowing into the next, creating not chaos, but clarity. His voice carried as he explained the pattern. He spoke of how the professor's lessons hinted at a deeper truth, that the knowledge was not simply theory, but a warning of forces dangerous and unstable. He showed how each fragment revealed paths the professor had not dared to outline. He connected the hidden meanings into a whole, revealing that the lectures were not just teaching but preparing minds for dangers to come, preparing students for choices that would shape civilizations. And as his words filled the hall, silence grew heavier, for even the professor had never spoken his lessons in this way. The professor's eyes widened despite himself, his pride trembling under the weight of what he witnessed, for the human was not merely defiant. He was opening doors even the professor had feared to touch. His voice cracked with restrained fury as he demanded how the human dared to reshape his teachings, how he dared to expand upon them. The human answered softly that knowledge was not meant to be kept in cages, that meaning lived only when it grew, and that he had only followed the threads the professor had already woven. He had only walked the path that had already been hidden in the lectures themselves. The students shivered, their whispers turning to silence, their contempt shifting into awe. They realized the professor was no longer testing the human. The professor was being tested himself, for before the eyes of the academy his own hidden fears and unspoken truths had been laid bare, his own lessons expanded and clarified by the very student he had sought to humiliate. The weight of it pressed down on the hall, and every alien felt it in their bones, that something was shifting, that something dangerous and unstoppable was awakening in the human. The professor's silver face darkened, his hands trembling with fury, yet his voice came cold and sharp. He declared that this was not the end, that what the human had done was dangerous, reckless, perhaps even heretical, and that the galaxy itself would demand to see the truth of this human mind. He said the academy would not be enough to contain it, that the human would face judgment beyond these walls. The alien students gasped, their hearts racing with dread and wonder, for they knew the professor's words meant exposure. They meant that this challenge would spread beyond the academy, that the galaxy would indeed take notice. The human stood calm, his eyes unwavering, his smile faint but steady. He answered with quiet certainty that he was ready for whatever the galaxy would bring, his voice carrying like a steady flame in the dark. And the hall trembled with his words, the silence that followed heavy with the weight of what had been unleashed. Every alien in that chamber left wondering if this was brilliance, if this was defiance, or if it was something greater, something beyond words. The hall shivered as the professor's voice rang out, his tall silver frame casting a shadow that stretched across the chamber like the blade of judgment. His eyes gleamed with cold fire, his pride wounded yet still unyielding. He declared that memory was a trick and comprehension was a gamble and creation was arrogance, that if the human believed he could defy the traditions of the Academy, then he would face the trial that had shattered every mind before him. The trial whispered in silence among students as the impossible lecture, a torrent of knowledge so fast and merciless that no being had endured it without breaking. The alien students stirred uneasily. Their claws scraped against metal desks. Their tendrils curled tight with dread. Their wings twitched in nervous folds. Some whispered that the human would finally fall. Others whispered that perhaps he would not. And those whispers frightened them more than failure itself. The professor raised his long fingers, and with a flick of his hand the walls erupted in light. Streams of alien script poured across the screens in violent rivers. Equations spun and twisted like storms of fire. Diagrams shifted into paradoxes. Theories collided and shattered like stars exploding. The speed unrelenting, the pressure suffocating. The students cried out, shielding their eyes. Some turned away trembling, for even to witness such velocity was pain. Their minds recoiled. Their memory splintered. The torrent was not meant for thought but for destruction. Yet at the center of the storm the human sat unmoving, his eyes open, his gaze locked upon the flood of symbols, his body still, his breath slow, as though he were not drowning but breathing in the storm itself, as though the chaos was not fire consuming him but a song that he alone could hear. His fingers tapped lightly against his desk in rhythm no alien could follow. The professor's lips curled into a sharp smile, his pride demanding collapse, his arrogance thirsting for the sight of the human breaking. Yet as the moments stretched into minutes his smile wavered. The human did not flinch, did not tremble, did not avert his gaze. Instead his expression grew sharper, his eyes alive with clarity. And then he did the unthinkable. He closed his eyes, turning away from the torrent, and still he remained calm. The alien students gasped, thinking madness had consumed him. But his voice rose steady and quiet, speaking not to anyone but to himself, whispering the rhythm of the storm as if mapping it in his mind. The torrent raged on, symbols crashing like waves, knowledge too fast for reason. But the human's whispers grew louder, shaping fragments into patterns, weaving fragments into meaning. And soon the alien students realized he was keeping pace, his mind running alongside the storm. He was not watching. He was becoming part of it. His lips moved faster. His fingers traced invisible shapes in the air. His voice steadier with each passing moment, until the impossible lecture came to its violent end. The screens went dark. The silence slammed into the hall like the aftermath of a great thunderclap, and every gaze turned toward the human. The professor straightened, expecting collapse, expecting screams, expecting silence of defeat. But instead the human rose slowly, his step steady, his face calm, his eyes burning with fire deeper than any alien could comprehend. He walked to the front of the hall, where the massive board stretched empty and waiting. He picked up the stylus, his hand unshaken, and he began to write, at first slowly, then faster, filling the board with the torrent that had passed only moments ago. Each symbol clear, each diagram sharp, each equation perfect, his movement smooth, his memory flawless. The alien students stared in disbelief as the chaos of the storm returned to order under his hand. Gasps echoed, tendrils twitched uncontrollably, claws rattled against desks, wings fluttered in shock. The human did not simply reproduce what had been shown. He reordered it, reshaped it, made it clear. He spoke as he wrote, his voice explaining the hidden threads, the structure beneath the madness. He said that the torrent was not chaos at all, that it was a wave with rhythm, that if one listened beyond the panic, one could hear the pulse of it, feel the rise and fall. He said that knowledge had patterns just as oceans had tides and storms had winds and hearts had beats, and that he had simply listened. The professor's silver mask faltered, his eyes narrowing with something close to fear, for the human was not just surviving the impossible lecture. He was mastering it. He was bending it into shape. He was creating clarity from the unendurable. And worse still, he was teaching. His words carried across the hall not as defiance, but as revelation. The alien students who had mocked him now leaned forward, their minds unwilling yet eager to follow. They saw patterns where before they had seen only storms. They felt understanding where before there had been only pain. They realized the human was not only enduring knowledge, but spreading it. The scaled student hissed under its breath, its eyes wide with disbelief, whispering that no being should hold such power. The insect-eyed one clicked in nervous awe. The feathered one's wings shook as if caught in unseen winds. All of them knew they were witnessing something that broke the laws of their academy, something that challenged the pride of their professor, something that could not be contained within tradition. The human stepped back at last, the board filled with clarity, his voice calm as he said that chaos is only chaos until someone listens, and that humans were listeners to storms. The silence after his words was deep, almost unbearable. The professor's silver hand shook faintly, though he tried to hide it. His pride screamed for denial, yet his mind whispered the truth. For in all his centuries, he had never seen the impossible lecture endured, never seen it mastered, never seen it rewritten with greater order than his own. His voice emerged low and trembling with restrained fury. He said that the human had done what no one else had, but that the galaxy beyond these walls would not believe it, that they would demand proof, that they would test him until his mind broke, and that even if he survived, his kind would never again be underestimated. The alien students shifted, their whispers sharp with dread. Some said the professor was right, that the galaxy would fear this human. Others whispered that the galaxy would seek to control him, to chain him, to use his mind as a weapon. But all agreed on one truth, that something dangerous had been unleashed in this hall, something that could not be undone. The professor raised his hand once more, his voice sharp as thunder, declaring that the next trial would not be knowledge alone but survival of what knowledge unleashed, and the words left the hall shaking with anticipation. The human stood calm, his smile faint but steady, his gaze unbroken. He bowed his head slightly in acceptance, his voice soft yet certain as he said he was ready, that he had faced storms before and would face them again. His words cut through the silence like fire through shadows, and the hall trembled with the weight of them, every alien heart pounding with dread and wonder, for they knew the next trial would go beyond memory and comprehension and even creation. It would test the limits of what a human mind and spirit could endure, and none could guess what would happen when that trial began. The great hall of the Alien Academy quivered with silence, as if the very walls felt the weight of what had just unfolded. The human had endured the impossible lecture, had mastered the torrent of knowledge that had broken every mind before him, had reshaped it with clarity that stunned even the professor. And now every alien sat frozen in disbelief, their eyes wide, their bodies stiff, their voices caught in throats too dry to whisper. The human stood calm at the front of the hall, his hands steady, his expression serene, his gaze unwavering, as though nothing impossible had just been done, as though his triumph was as natural as breathing. The professor stood tall, his silver skin gleaming under the pale lights, his eyes sharp with pride, yet dark with unease, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, his voice low but heavy with restrained fury. He declared that what had been shown was dangerous, reckless, a threat to the balance of the academy and perhaps even to the galaxy itself. He said that memory and comprehension and even mastery of chaos were not enough to prove greatness, that true greatness demanded creation, demanded discovery, demanded something new born not of repetition but of imagination, and his words thundered across the chamber, rattling the hearts of every student. The students stirred nervously, their tendrils twisting, their claws tapping, their wings rustling, for they knew what the professor meant. They knew the trial of creation was not a test but a trap, a demand that no student could satisfy without collapse, for creation was unpredictable, creation was wild, and in the academy order was worshipped and control was sacred. No alien dared to step beyond the safety of structure. No alien dared to risk invention before the professor's gaze. Yet here the human stood, his desk empty, his notes absent, his mind his only weapon, and the challenge pressed upon him like a storm waiting to break. The professor's voice rose sharp and cold as he commanded the human to take the fragments of the impossible lecture, the scattered shards of ancient knowledge, the equations, the diagrams, the theories, and to weave from them something entirely new, something that had never existed before, something that would stand as proof that his defiance was not arrogance but strength. And the students gasped, their eyes widening in terror and anticipation, for they believed no one could do this, not even the brightest among them. They waited with claws and mandibles and wings trembling, eager to witness, at last, the fall of the human. But the human did not tremble, he did not falter, he did not even hesitate. Instead, he stepped forward once more, his hand reaching calmly for the stylus, his eyes bright with focus, his smile faint but steady. He began to draw upon the board, not copying, not repeating, but creating. His lines curved into shapes the aliens had never seen. His diagrams flowed with connections that defied tradition. His voice carried softly as he explained the logic of what he'd built. He spoke of forces in balance, of chaos given form, of patterns within storms that could be shaped into energy, into movement, into possibility. And the aliens leaned forward in awe despite themselves. Gasps rippled through the chamber as the human's creation grew. The board filled not with chaos, but with elegance, not with fragments, but with harmony. His hands moved swiftly yet with control. His eyes glowed with vision that none could match. The insect-eyed student clicked nervously as it realized the human was not only inventing but solving. The scaled one hissed as its tail thrashed in disbelief. The feathered one's wings trembled as though caught in unseen winds. Every alien understood that what they were witnessing was not just creation but revelation. The human was building something that even the professor had never imagined. The professor's silver mask trembled, his eyes narrowing with a fury born not of scorn but of fear. For he recognized the power in what was being drawn. He recognized that the human had not only followed his hidden lessons but surpassed them, had leapt beyond his structures into a place he himself had never dared to go. His voice cracked as he demanded to know how the human could do this, how he could create something from fragments without guidance. The human turned calmly, his voice soft but strong. He said that humanity had always created from fragments, that survival demanded it, that they had built fire from sparks, shelters from ruins, weapons from stone, meaning from silence, and now he was doing the same with knowledge. The students whispered in awe and dread, their voices rising like waves in the silence. Some said the human was brilliant, others said he was dangerous. Some whispered that this was not genius, but madness given shape. Yet none could deny what stood before them on the board, a creation alive with meaning, a design so strange yet so clear that even their alien minds could sense its truth. The human stepped back at last, his hand lowering, his breath steady, his eyes fixed on the professor, and he said calmly that this was what he saw, that this was what knowledge meant when it was not caged, that this was what it meant to be human. The professor's silver face darkened, his pride cracking under the weight of humiliation. His hand shook though he tried to hide it. His voice rose sharp and cold as he declared that the human had gone too far, that he had broken the sacred rules of the academy, that he had trespassed into knowledge that was not his to wield. But even as he spoke, the tremor in his tone betrayed him, for he knew the truth. He knew what the students now whispered among themselves, that the human had done what no one had ever done, that he had turned defiance into revelation, that he had not only matched the professor but surpassed him. The students stared in silence, their eyes wide with fear and wonder, their hearts racing. They knew the galaxy would not ignore this. They knew word of this moment would spread beyond the academy, that rulers and scholars and warlords would all hear of the human who defied the impossible, who created where others collapsed, who saw patterns where others saw madness, and dread filled their veins. For they could not decide if this was a promise of greatness or a warning of danger. The professor himself stood rigid, his voice a low hiss as he declared that this moment would not remain within these walls, that galaxy itself would now judge. The human gave a simple nod, his calm smile unbroken, his voice soft yet unshaken as he said that he was ready, that humanity had always been ready, that storms did not frighten them, that silence did not bind them, that defiance was not arrogance but survival. And his words carried across the chamber like fire in the dark. The students shivered, the walls seemed to tremble, and in that moment they understood that this was not the end of a lesson, but the beginning of something far greater, something vast and unstoppable. The professor's silver eyes burned with fury and fear as he raised his hand one final time, declaring that the galaxy would test this human to the edge of mind and soul. The hall fell into silence once more, heavy and unbroken, every alien heart pounding with dread, every gaze fixed upon the human who stood calm at the center. The whisper passed from desk to desk, from mandible to tendril to wing. The whisper that what had been seen here was not just defiance, not just mastery, not just creation, but a turning point, a moment from which the galaxy itself would never turn back. The hall remained frozen in silence, the alien professor's silver form standing rigid at the front, his words echoing that the galaxy itself would now judge. The alien students sat motionless, their bodies tense, their hearts pounding, their eyes fixed upon the lone human, who stood calm and unbroken, the atmosphere thick with awe and fear. For they all knew that something had shifted forever, that the moment was no longer about a single lecture or a single test, but about the weight of humanity, itself standing before them like a shadow cast across the stars. The human did not bow his head. He did not lower his gaze. He stood steady and quiet, his presence radiating a strange gravity that pulled every thought in the chamber toward him. The insect-eyed student twitched nervously, mandibles clattering in soft clicks of disbelief. The scaled one hissed low with unease, its tail striking against the floor. The feathered one's wings quivered against its sides, yet none spoke aloud. None dared to break the silence, for the human's calm had unsettled them. More than any storm of knowledge, more than any torrent of symbols, more than any creation upon the board. The professor's voice returned, sharp but trembling beneath its edges. He declared that what had been shown here was not mastery but rebellion, not discipline but danger, that the human had torn away the sacred order of the academy and replaced it with chaos disguised as brilliance. He warned that such defiance could not remain hidden, that it would spread like fire and burn through every system, that the galaxy would not watch silently but would act. And his silver eyes burned with both fury and fear as he spoke, his words striking like knives across the silence. But the human stepped forward, his eyes steady, his voice calm. He said that knowledge was never meant to be caged, that truth was not born to be hidden, that storms could be feared but also followed, that silence could hold terror but also meaning. He said that humanity did not come to the academy to bow but to learn, not to copy but to create, not to survive within cages but to walk beyond them. His words carried across the chamber like sparks in the dark, and the alien students felt those sparks catch upon their minds like embers upon dry grass. Gasps rippled through the hall. Whispers rose in trembling waves. Some muttered that the human was mad, others that he was brilliant. Some whispered that he was both. Yet all of them knew they would never forget what they had seen. The insect-eyed one leaned toward its neighbor, clicking frantically, that no species could survive such storms of knowledge. Yet this human had. The scaled one whispered with trembling voice that if one human could do this, then what could many do? The feathered one's wings shifted with unease as it murmured that perhaps the galaxy itself was not ready for what humanity truly was. The professor's face hardened, his silver hands clenched tightly behind his back, his voice a low growl as he said that readiness did not matter, that the galaxy would judge regardless, that rulers and scholars and soldiers would come, that humanity would be tested not in halls, but in battlefields, not with questions, but with survival. And his words sent a shiver through every alien present, for they all knew the professor was right. They knew the echo of this moment would reach far beyond the walls, and they trembled at what would follow. The human listened in silence, his calm smile faint but unbroken, his eyes burning with quiet certainty. And when he spoke, his voice was soft yet carried to every corner. He said that humanity had always been judged by storms, by hunger, by fire, by war, and yet they had endured. They had risen. They had turned judgment into history. He said that if the galaxy wished to test them, then let it, for humanity did not fear judgment. Humanity wrote it. And his words struck like lightning across the silence, leaving the students breathless, their hearts pounding, their gazes unblinking. The alien student stared at him as if he were something other than flesh and bone, something more, something forged by storms. The insect-eyed one trembled with disbelief. The scaled one lowered its head. The feathered one whispered softly that it finally understood why humans frightened so many. The whisper spread through the hall, like waves crashing against stone. Whispers of danger, whispers of wonder, whispers of destiny. The professor stood silent for a long moment, his silver mask unsteady, his pride shattered though his authority still clung to his frame like armor. Yet even he could not deny what had been done. At last he spoke, his voice low and cold. He declared before all that the human had passed every trial, that he had done what no student had done before, that his defiance could not be denied, that his mind had reached beyond the limits of the academy. But he warned that triumph here was not victory in the galaxy, that the true test awaited beyond these walls, and his words echoed like thunder. Yet behind them trembled something he did not speak, something the students all sensed, that the professor himself had been humbled, that his reign of fear had been cracked by a single human mind. The human bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement, not in submission, but in respect to the moment, his voice steady as he said that notes may capture words, but not meaning, that memory may preserve lessons, but not destiny, that true learning was not obedience, but creation, not silence, but courage. And his final words struck through the silence like fire. He said the humans did not only take notes. Humans wrote history, and the hall shook with the weight of it. The alien students stared wide-eyed, their thoughts consumed, their fears awakened, their wonder ignited. Silence returned once more, deep and heavy, the echoes of his words lingering in every corner. The insect-eyed student could not look away. The scaled one pressed its claws tight against the desk, as if grounding itself. The feathered one folded its wings close, and all of them knew that the galaxy was no longer the same. The professor stood frozen, his silver eyes dim with unease, his authority fractured, and the human turned, calm and steady, walking back toward his seat, every eye following him as though watching a force of nature take shape before them. The whisper began again, soft but growing, spreading from one student to another. The whisper that this moment was not just about a lecture or a test or even a defiance. It was about the rise of something new, about the awakening of a species none had understood, a species that saw storms as music, silence as meaning, chaos as patterns, a species that did not bow but endured, that did not obey but created. And as that whisper filled the chamber, the aliens trembled with the knowledge that the galaxy itself would soon tremble too. The human sat down, his desk still empty, his gaze calm, his breath steady, his presence unshaken, and the hall remained silent, heavy with realization. The professor did not speak again, for no words could undo what had been done. No authority could erase what had been shown. The stunned class sat frozen in awe and fear, and in that silence the truth grew undeniable, that this was not the end of a lesson, not the end of a defiance, but the beginning of a new history, one that humanity itself would write.